Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have some heartbreaking news to discuss. News that is bound to hit home, especially for those of you who love baseball or have a deep appreciation for sports history. The world of sports has lost an absolute icon, a figure who wasn't just a player, but a force of nature both on and off the field. We're talking about none other than Pete Rose. If you followed baseball at any point in the past several decades, you know this name all too well. Whether you remember him as Charlie Hustle, the guy who seemed to give everything he had in every single game, or you know him for the controversies that clouded his later years, Pete Rose is a figure that everyone seems to have an opinion about. But today, we're here to talk about Pete Rose's legacy and the incredible impact he had on the game of baseball, because the news we just received is truly sad. Pete Rose has passed away at the age of 83. Let that sink in for a moment. One of the greatest hitters the game has ever seen, the man who still holds the record for the most career hits in Major League Baseball, is no longer with us. Regardless of where you stand on the many debates that have surrounded him, there's no denying the fact that baseball will never be the same without Pete Rose. Now, before we dive into the complexities and controversies that have followed Pete throughout his life, let's take a step back for a second and really appreciate the kind of career this man had. Pete Rose wasn't just any baseball player. He was an absolute legend, a generational talent who defined an era of the game. He was at the heart of one of the most dominant teams in baseball history, the Cincinnati Reds of the 1970s, also known as the Big Red Machine. This team was a powerhouse, and Pete Rose was a key reason for that success. Let's break it down for those who might not be fully familiar with Pete Rose's career. Over his 24-year career, Pete Rose racked up an unbelievable 4,256 hits. Let that number sink in for a minute. 4,256 hits. It's a record that still stands today. And quite frankly, it's hard to even imagine anyone breaking it. Rose was the kind of player who made it look effortless, but when you really think about it, achieving that many hits over such a long period of time is nothing short of incredible. And it wasn't just about the numbers with Pete. Sure, the stats are impressive, but it was his approach to the game that truly set him apart. He brought an energy, a passion, and a level of commitment to baseball that was unmatched. This is a guy who would sprint to first base after getting walked. That's the kind of hustle he played with. It was that hustle that earned him the nickname Charlie Hustle, and it's a name that stuck with him throughout his career because, quite frankly, it fit him perfectly. Pete Rose had a relentless drive on the field, a level of intensity that made it impossible not to root for him. Whether he was playing in the outfield, at third base, or even first base later in his career, he was always giving 110%. And that's part of what made Pete Rose such a beloved figure in the world of baseball. But as we all know, Pete Rose's story isn't just about triumphs on the field. It's also about the controversies that followed him later in his life. And as much as people love to talk about his record-breaking stats and his incredible career, they also can't help but bring up the lifetime ban he received from baseball. So let's talk about that for a second because it's impossible to discuss Pete Rose's legacy without mentioning it. In 1989, Pete Rose was banned for life from Major League Baseball after it was revealed that he had bet on baseball games while managing the Cincinnati Reds. This was a bombshell at the time, and it completely changed the course of his career, and really his entire life. The ban meant that Pete Rose became ineligible for induction into the Hall of Fame, despite being one of the greatest players to ever step foot on a baseball diamond. And for years, Pete denied these allegations. He swore up and down that he had never bet on baseball, maintaining his innocence in the face of mounting evidence. But in 2004, Pete Rose finally came clean. In his autobiography, he admitted to betting on games, but he always maintained that he never bet against his own team. This confession opened up an entirely new chapter in the debate surrounding Pete Rose. Fans were divided. Should a player's on-field accomplishments be enough to secure him a spot in the Hall of Fame? Or should the rules, specifically the one about gambling on baseball, be followed to the letter, no matter how great the player? To this day, that's a debate that rages on, with passionate arguments on both sides. Many baseball fans and even some players argue that Pete Rose's legacy on the field is too great to ignore. They say he deserves a place in Cooperstown because, let's face it, when you're talking about the greatest hitters of all time, Pete Rose's name has to come up. But others believe that the rules are there for a reason, and Pete broke one of the most important ones in the sport. And now, with his passing, we're left to wonder how that conversation will change. Will people look at his career in a different light now that he's no longer here to defend himself? Will there be renewed calls to finally get him into the Hall of Fame? Or will his legacy remain as complicated as ever, a mix of brilliance and controversy? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. Pete Rose's impact on the game of baseball is undeniable, and his story will continue to be a part of the sport's history for generations to come. Now let's take a closer look at Pete Rose's career. As we mentioned earlier, he was a key player for the Cincinnati Reds during the 1970s, a period when the team was an absolute powerhouse in Major League Baseball. Known as the Big Red Machine, the Reds were dominant, winning multiple World Series titles during that decade. And Pete Rose was at the heart of it all. He was the kind of player who could do it all. He hit for average, he got on base, and he played with an intensity that few others could match. Over the course of his career, Pete Rose earned 17 All-Star selections, won 3 World Series titles, and took home 2 Gold Gloves. He was also named the National League MVP in 1973. One of the things that made Pete Rose such a remarkable player was his versatility. He played multiple positions over the course of his career, including outfield, third base, and first base, and he excelled at all of them. That kind of versatility is rare in any sport, but in baseball, it's especially impressive. It shows just how valuable Pete was to his team. No matter where they put him, he was always one of the best players on the field. And that's part of why he was so beloved by fans. People loved watching Pete Rose play because they knew they were watching greatness in action. But as we've already touched on, Pete Rose's story isn't just about what he did on the field. It's also about the controversies that came later in his life. The most significant of these controversies, of course, is the lifetime ban he received from Major League Baseball for betting on games. The ban has been a subject of debate for years, and even today, people are divided on whether or not Pete Rose should be allowed into the Hall of Fame. Now, to be clear, the rule that Pete Rose broke is one of the most important ones in baseball. The sport has always taken a hard stance on gambling, and for good reason. Betting on games can undermine the integrity of the sport, and Major League Baseball has made it clear that gambling is something they won't tolerate. That's why the punishment for betting on games is so severe. When Pete Rose was found to have placed bets while managing the Cincinnati Reds, the league had no choice but to impose the lifetime ban. For years, Pete Rose denied the allegations, insisting that he had never bet on baseball. But in 2004, he finally admitted that he had placed bets on games, though he always maintained that he never bet against his own team. This confession was a turning point in the debate about Pete Rose's legacy. Some fans and players believed that Pete's honesty should be rewarded and that his accomplishments on the field should outweigh the mistakes he made off the field. Others, however, felt that the ban should remain in place because Pete had broken one of the most fundamental rules of the game. So, where do you stand on this issue? Do you believe Pete Rose's accomplishments as a player are enough to earn him a place in the Hall of Fame, despite the mistakes he made later in his career? Or do you think the rules are the rules, and Pete crossed a line that can't be undone? It's a debate that has been going on for years, and with Pete's passing, it's likely to intensify. Beyond his accomplishments on the field and the controversies off of it, Pete Rose had a larger-than-life personality. Even after being banned from baseball, he remained connected to the sport in his own way. He made appearances at events, gave interviews, and sometimes Yes, he even made headlines for the wrong reasons. But one thing that never changed was Pete's love for the game of baseball. He was a man who lived and breathed the sport, and even after his playing days were over, he remained a passionate ambassador for the game. Pete Rose's passing is a huge loss for the baseball world. Whether you were a fan of his or not, there's no denying the impact he had on the game. His hustle, his determination, and his incredible talent are things that baseball fans will never forget. And as the debate about his legacy continues, one thing is for sure. Pete Rose will always be remembered as one of the greatest hitters to ever play the game. As we wrap up this video, we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Pete Rose's legacy? Should he be inducted into the Hall of Fame, or should the lifetime ban remain in place? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. And we